If you have ever sat in a class, conversation, or in front of a book and walked away feeling like nothing actually landed, it probably wasn't about attention. It wasn't about intelligence either. There's something quieter happening, something most people never name, and it has less to do with how smart you are and everything to do with how open you are. Not open in the way people usually mean it, not be positive or stay curious. Something deeper than that, something that shapes what your mind actually allows in.
People with lower openness don't learn less because they're trying less. They often try harder. They take notes, they reread, they show up. But something keeps the information at the surface level. It gets filed, not felt. Understood technically, but never absorbed. You'll notice it in small ways. The person who hears a new idea and immediately explains why it won't work before they've actually sat with it. The student who needs the teacher to say it exactly the right way or it doesn't register. The professional who's skilled in one method and finds every other method slightly suspicious. It doesn't look like resistance, it looks like preference, like standards, like knowing what works. That's the subtle part. When the mind is guarded, it doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rejects what doesn't fit the shape of what it already knows.
Openness, as a psychological trait, isn't about being agreeable or easygoing. It's about how much novelty your nervous system can tolerate, how comfortable you are sitting with something unresolved, how willing you are to let an idea exist before you judge it. And here's where it gets interesting. Learning, real learning, requires a moment of not knowing. It requires you to hold something you don't understand yet without immediately reaching for what you already do understand. That gap, that uncomfortable in-between space, is where growth actually happens. People high in openness tend to find that gap interesting. People low in openness tend to find it threatening. Not consciously, not dramatically, just their mind wants to close it as fast as possible, wants to categorize, label, file, and move on, wants to be back on solid ground. And so they move on, before the idea has had time to settle.
But the real reason isn't what most people think. It's not about intelligence. It's not even about effort. It's about identity. When you learn something truly new, not just a new fact, but a genuinely different way of seeing, it threatens who you already think you are. It asks your current self to make room for a version of you that doesn't exist yet. That's uncomfortable, especially if your sense of self is tightly held, especially if you've built your identity around being competent, experienced, or certain. For people who score lower on openness, learning isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's identity negotiation. Every new idea is, underneath it all, a quiet challenge to the person they've already decided they are. That's not weakness, that's a protection mechanism. The mind doing exactly what it was trained to do, keeping the self intact.
People who learn fluidly, who pick things up quickly, who adapt, who seem to absorb ideas from everywhere, aren't just smarter or more disciplined. They tend to have a looser relationship with their current self. They're not as attached to who they are right now, which means they can afford to be wrong. They can afford to be changed. It's not confidence that makes someone a good learner. It's a specific kind of comfort with uncertainty, a willingness to exist in a state of becoming rather than a state of being. And the fascinating thing is, this isn't fixed. Openness isn't purely genetic. It's also shaped by experience, by safety, by how many times you were allowed to be wrong without it costing you something. Some people learned early that being wrong was dangerous, that not knowing was embarrassing, that having a confident answer was safer than sitting in a question, and so they closed, gradually, without even realizing it.
So what you call difficulty learning, the feeling that things don't stick, that ideas slide off, that you have to work twice as hard for half the result, it often has less to do with your brain and more to do with how safe it feels to not know something. It was never just about focus. It was about how much of yourself you could afford to let change. Once you see it that way, you start to notice it everywhere. In conversations where you're already forming a response before the other person finishes. In moments where something new feels irritating instead of interesting. In the slight discomfort you feel when someone tells you there's a different way to do the thing you've been doing for years. It's not stubbornness, it's structure, the mind protecting the shape it already has. And that awareness, just that, is already a kind of opening. If this explained something for you, there's more to uncover.